The wind screamed through the pines like a choir of restless spirits. Snow hurled itself against the mountainside, whitening the night, swallowing every sound but its own. In the small cabin perched against the slope, Elias McGraw sat alone by a dying fire, pipe unlit in his hand, eyes locked on the flames as though they might answer the silence that had lived with him for years. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The mountain man had learned to live with silence. He had buried it in his bones, carved it into the walls of his cabin, the silence of a woman's last breath, the silence of snow falling over a grave dug in frozen ground, the silence he swore he'd never break again. Then came the knock. It was faint at first, drowned in the storm. Then harder, frantic, a human rhythm against the wooden door demanding notice. Elias's hand clenched around the haft of his knife. He hadn't heard that sound in years, not since the soldiers, not since the screams, not since he had closed his door forever to everything living. Another knock. Elias rose slowly, every joint stiff from cold and solitude. He opened the door and the storm pushed a figure into his world, half frozen, snow clinging to her bonnet and dress, eyes wide with fear and defiance. She nearly collapsed over the threshold but held herself upright with a strength that startled him. "Please," she gasped. "They're after me." Her name would come later, Clara Donovan. For now, Elias saw only a woman desperate enough to climb into the teeth of the bitterroot blizzard. Behind her, through the white chaos, faint torchlight flickered, riders threading the dark. His first instinct was to shut the door. He had sworn after his wife's death that no woman would ever cross this threshold again, no heart allowed near his. But the rider's light drew closer, and Clara's eyes locked on his with something that was not begging, but daring. "Let them take me," she whispered, "and you'll hear the silence too." The words pierced. Against every oath, every scar carved into his chest, Elias pulled her inside. He barred the door. And for the first time in years, the silence inside his cabin cracked. The fire popped, scattering sparks into the dim air. Shadows climbed the log walls of the cabin, long and restless, as though they too distrusted the stranger who had stumbled in from the storm. Clara sat hunched near the hearth, her hands extended toward the flame, steam rising from her damp skirts. Elias stood in the corner, broad frame, rigid, rifle propped against his shoulder, eyes never leaving her. The cabin had not seen a woman's breath in near a decade. The last had left it with her lifeblood on its floor. Elias still remembered how the wind had carried the smell of smoke from the soldiers' torches that night. Remembered the way her hand had slipped from his. He had built walls thicker than pine and rock since then. But here sat another woman, alive, stubborn, unyielding. "You shouldn't have opened the door," Clara said softly, her voice cracked by cold but steady in its resolve. "I wouldn't have were I you." Her candor unsettled him. Most who came to the mountains begged or lied. She did neither. She simply sat there, blue eyes locked on the flames, jaw tight with exhaustion and fear. Elias kept his distance. "You running from law?" Her lips parted. She looked at him fully now, her face pale, a trace of frostbite on her cheeks. "Not law. Men who think they are above it." He said nothing. His silence pressed, the way storms pressed on timber until it bent or broke. Clara filled the space with her truth. "I taught children," she continued, "some white, some Shoshone. The council said the classroom wasn't meant for all of them. I said they were wrong. That's when the riders came. When words fail men like them, they reach for rope." Elias's jaw tightened. He remembered rope. Remembered the posts where his wife's kin were strung as warnings. Remembered the stench of burning hide. "You should have stayed in town," he muttered. "They would have buried me in it," Clara shot back, her voice sharp with defiance. "I'd rather freeze in your mountain than let them silence me there." For a moment, the storm outside seemed to retreat. Her words hung heavy, sharp as the steel of his knife. Elias felt the old wound tear wider inside his chest. He had sworn to never again be bound by another's cause, never again to shoulder the weight of someone else's fight. Yet this woman's presence stirred something dangerous. Memory, anger, recognition. The night stretched long. He stoked the fire, set bread and venison on the table, though he did not eat. Clara accepted her portion without gratitude, without complaint, as though to accept it was her right, not his gift. That too unsettled him. At dawn the storm lifted. Pale light spilled through the cracks in the shutters. Elias stepped outside, rifle in hand, boots sinking into the snow. The mountain lay hushed, white and glistening, but below in the valley, Faint smoke trails rose. Riders still searching. He spat into the snow. They would not give up. Inside, Clara had risen, her hair unbound, drying in waves near the fire. She looked stronger than the woman who had staggered into his cabin, though her eyes told of the night's unrest. "They won't stop," she said simply. "Men like them never do." Elias dropped his rifle against the wall. His shoulders sagged. He had promised himself never again to be drawn into the quarrels of the flatlands. The mountains had taken him in as penance, as refuge, but Clara's presence gnawed at him. "You think you can hide here?" he asked. "I think you know they'll kill me if I go back." Her words found him like arrows. She had stripped the choice bare, open his door to the storm again or shut it on her life. He thought of the night he had lost his wife, the cries unanswered, the silence that followed. Elias rubbed his temple, a groan low in his throat. "The mountain will break you," he said finally. "Harder than they ever could." Clara straightened her back. "Then let it try." He looked at her long, searching for weakness. What he found instead was steel, the kind forged not in iron but in suffering born and endured. The cabin felt smaller now, walls pressing closer with the weight of choice. Elias realized he had already made it. By opening his door, by letting her breathe his fire's warmth, he had tethered himself once more to the world he had fled. He threw more wood on the fire, the sparks catching like defiance. "You stay," he said, voice rough, final. "But don't mistake this mountain for mercy. It will test you. And so will I." Clara met his gaze without flinching. "Good," she whispered. "I wouldn't want it any other way." The fire cracked, and with it, the silence that had lived in the cabin for years finally gave way to something else. Not peace. Not yet, but the beginning of an unspoken accord. Snow lay heavy on the roof, groaning as the wind pressed down on it like a living weight. The world beyond the cabin had vanished beneath white drifts. No path visible, no valley, no sky. Only the endless hush of winter swallowing the mountains. The storm caged them together. Elias worked in silence, chopping wood until sweat froze in the threads of his shirt. Clara carried the logs inside, her hands red and raw, but she never once complained. The fire burned brighter for her effort. In the evenings, when the world outside howled, the cabin glowed like a single ember lost in the dark. It was there beside the firelight that their walls began to crack. Clara took up his coat one night, stitching its torn seams with thread she found in a drawer. Her fingers worked clumsily at first, but determination steadied them. Elias watched, silent, noticing the way her brow furrowed in concentration. She did not ask permission. She acted as though the cabin were as much hers as his, and strangely, that did not anger him. "Your arms," she said suddenly, eyes lifting. "They're scarred." Elias's jaw hardened. He shifted in his chair, shadows cloaking the map of burns and cuts across his skin. "Mountain takes its toll," he muttered. Clara didn't press, but her gaze lingered. She had seen scars before, on boys turned soldiers, on her brother who had never come home. These were different. These told of battles fought in silence, not for glory but survival. Later, when the fire burned low, she spoke. Her voice carried the weight of memory, fragile yet unflinching. "My brother was 17. The cavalry called it a skirmish. He never fired a shot. They buried him in a ditch with the others, called it necessary. I used to dream of vengeance. But vengeance is a fire that eats only the one who feeds it. I had to let it die." The cabin grew still. Elias turned his eyes away, but her words struck deep. He remembered his own fire, the rage that had driven him from the Shoshone camp after his wife was slaughtered. He had wanted vengeance too, had burned for it until it hollowed him. "You learned what I didn't," he said at last, voice gravel low. "I let it eat me." Silence returned, but it was not the old silence. It was softer now, heavy with unspoken recognition. Days bled together in the storm. Clara learned the snares, checking them with steady hands, her breath white against the pines. She carried rabbits back through the drifts, refusing his help, proud of her strength. Elias sharpened his axe while watching her move through snow. Not delicate, not fragile, but resolute. One evening she brought him the rabbit stew she had prepared. He tasted it without comment, but when she turned away, a flicker of a smile touched his lips, the first in years. By night they sat opposite each other in the dim cabin. Firelight danced across their faces, throwing shadows on the walls. They spoke in fragments, stories half told, questions left unfinished. Yet in those fragments something lived, an undercurrent neither dared name. Clara noticed the way he listened even in silence, the way his eyes softened when she laughed at herself, the way he always placed another log on the fire when she shivered. Elias noticed the steadiness of her hands, the quiet strength in her defiance, the light that refused to bow to darkness. Still, he held himself apart. His oath, his grief, bound him like iron. Love was a door he had barred long ago, and each glance at Clara made him feel the weight of that bar pressing against his chest. One night, as the storm raged, Clara rose and stood by the shuttered window. Snow pressed hard against the wood, rattling in gusts. She looked back at him, her face lit by the glow of the fire. "Do you ever think the mountain keeps us here for a reason?" she asked softly. Elias stared into the flames. "Mountain doesn't care," he answered. "It takes what it wants." "Leaves nothing," Clara's gaze held his. "Maybe it leaves us what we need." The fire popped, sparks leaping like fleeting stars. Elias's throat tightened. He turned away, afraid of what her words stirred inside him. The storm outside screamed, but inside the cabin another storm gathered. Quieter, more dangerous. Neither spoke of it. Neither dared. But when Elias laid his rifle by the door and Clara set another log on the fire, the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt alive. And for the first time in years, Elias feared the silence breaking more than he feared the storm. The morning broke pale and brittle, snow crystals gleaming like shards of glass across the slopes. Smoke curled from Elias's chimney, thin against the wide sky. When the silence fractured, hoofbeats crunching frost, voices in a tongue Clara had not yet heard upon these mountains. Crow traders. They came with pelts slung across rawhide, bells faint at their horses' necks, faces lined from wind and long roads. Clara stepped back into the shadows of the doorway as Elias went forward, his broad frame stiffening. Their greeting was low, words carried in rhythm she could not follow, but their eyes moved toward her with questions, and then back to Elias with something heavier. Recognition. Memory. Elias's voice dropped. Caught between English and Crow, the men listened, one older with hair braided silver down his chest. He spoke Elias's name as though it belonged to another time. The air shifted, something unspoken pressing between them. Clara's hands tightened against her skirt. She felt it before she knew it. The past was opening, and Elias could not keep it sealed. The men left before noon, their horses carrying silence behind them. But Clara remained in the doorway waiting for Elias. He had not come in. He sat on a stump with his knife resting idle on his thigh, as if carving at ghosts. Finally, she stepped forward. What did they mean? Her voice was soft, yet it carried in the cold. He did not look up. Nothing you need, Carrie. But Clara did not move. Elias. His shoulders tightened. A long breath left him. Then, with the voice of a man splitting his own bones, he said, "My wife was with them, Shoshone. She carried our child when soldiers came drunk through the valley. They laughed while they burned my lodge. They cut her down before I could reach her. And the child. The child never came into this world." His eyes finally rose to hers, and Clara saw the weight of years etched like rivers in stone. "I buried them both by the river, and when the smoke cleared, I walked away from the people who once called me brother. I had no right to stay among them, not with the shame of surviving when they did not." The world seemed to still. Snow ticked off branches. The breath in Clara's lungs trembled. "I did not know," she whispered. "No." His reply was iron. "And you should not have to." That night, the cabin walls felt too close, firelight dragging shadows across wood and skin. Clara sat with her hands folded tight, staring into the flames. The silence between them was not safety now. It was a storm waiting to break. "You think grief makes you weak," she said at last. Elias's head turned slowly, as if her voice had pulled him from another life. "But love buried," she went on, "is still love wasted." His jaw tightened. A muscle flickered in his cheek. Don't what? Speak it?" Her voice cracked against the air, raw with what she had held too long. "I lost my brother to cavalry gunfire. They called it justice for nothing. He was 17, Elias. 17. And I carried hate in my chest until it ate everything I had left. But vengeance doesn't bring the dead back. Only love does. Only memory held gently, not locked away. The fire snapped. Her words hung like sparks, but Elias's hand slammed the table. You don't know what you ask. His voice roared like the mountains themselves. I cannot open that door again, not for you, not for anyone. If it breaks, I will not survive it. The silence after was worse than the thunder. Clara felt the sting of tears press against her eyes, but she turned away, refusing to let him see the fall. She pressed her palm to her mouth, shoulders shaking as the truth spilled into her chest. He would not let her in. And so she broke quietly by the fire, her breath hitching in soft, muffled sobs. Elias watched her. At first, he told himself he had no right to comfort her. He had built his cabin on solitude, walled his heart in stone, carved his life from silence. Yet seeing her, shoulders drawn inward, light breaking out of her in pain she did not want him to see, something inside him shifted. Her sorrow mirrored his own, as if the mountain had finally placed two broken halves in the same room. He stared into the flames until they blurred. His hand twitched, a man torn between chains and the impulse to reach across them. But he did not move. Not yet. Only his eyes stayed on her, refusing to look away, as if in the wreckage of her grief he had seen the first light his own heart had felt in years. The night closed in, wind dragging its low hymn across the timber walls. Outside, snow kept falling, erasing every trail but the one between two hearts learning the cost of silence. And though Elias did not speak, though he held his hands rigid at his sides, Clara felt it, the stir of something in him he could no longer bury. The storm broke at dawn. Clouds dragged themselves off the mountains, leaving the world carved in white silence. The snow had settled deep around Elias's cabin, every drift smooth as if no living soul had ever crossed it. But tracks do not lie. Hoofprints cut across the frozen valley, straight toward the cabin door. Elias stood at the window, his breath fogging the glass. Beyond the tree line, riders emerged one by one. 6 men on horses, coats heavy with frost, rifles slung low. Their voices carried through the brittle air, laughter sharp, hungry. At his back, Clara rose from the stool, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. Who are they? Town men, Elias muttered, eyes hard as flint. Come for you, her heart lurched. Then I should— No. His voice cracked like a rifle shot. He turned, the fire catching in his scarred face. They won't take you. Not while I breathe. The riders reined up at the porch, snow spraying from hooves. The leader, a broad man with a red scarf at his throat, cupped his hands and bellowed, Elias Walker! Step out, you're harboring a fugitive. Hand the woman over. She incited unrest at the garrison, stirred the people against the law. She comes with us, alive or in chains. The cabin door opened slow. Elias filled the frame, rifle cradled but not raised, eyes steady as a wolf's. Behind him, firelight flickered, and Clara's pale figure hovered like a shadow. You'll not touch her. His voice carried low, steady. Not here. The men shifted in their saddles. A crow called from somewhere in the pines, sharp against the silence. You think you can stand against the law? The leader sneered. You're just one man. One's enough, Elias said. The standoff thickened, every breath of steam from the horses hanging like smoke. Fingers edged near triggers. Snow groaned beneath hooves. Clara's voice broke through, trembling but clear. She stepped forward past Elias into the open doorway. This isn't his fight. It's mine. I'll go with you. No. Elias's hand shot out, barring her path. His body loomed in front of her, a wall of flesh and fury. His eyes, hard, unyielding, pinned the riders. She's mine. My claim, my protection. If you want her, you'll go through me. Something shifted then. The words hung heavy, not just defiance, but declaration. The riders faltered. Everyone in these valleys knew the name Elias Walker, mountain trapper, war-scarred, a man who had killed grizzlies with only a knife and lived through winters that swallowed whole towns. To cross him meant more than a fight. It meant war with the wilderness itself. The leader spat into the snow, trying to mask unease. She's worth hanging. You'll damn yourself for a woman. Elias's rifle lifted, slow, sure, until the barrel pointed straight at the man's chest. Better men than you have tried to damn me. Ride back while you still have legs to use. The silence stretched taut. Hooves shifted. Leather creaked. The men's eyes flicked between their leader and the dark shape filling the doorway. At last, the red-scarfed rider cursed under his breath. He tugged the reins, wheeled his horse about. The others followed one by one, muttering, their bravado shrinking into the trees. The valley swallowed them whole. Only the tracks remained. Inside, Clara's hands shook. She pressed them to her face, torn between relief and terror. You shouldn't have done that. They'll be back. They'll bring more. Elias set the rifle against the wall. His chest heaved once, then stilled. Slowly he turned toward her. I've hidden too long, he said, voice low as embers. Let them come. I won't turn you over, not now, not ever. Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time since she had crossed his threshold, she saw not just the mountain man, but the man himself. Scarred, haunted, unyielding, and though his words carried danger, they also carried something else, a vow. The night fell clear and bitter. Stars cut through the black like shards of ice. Inside, the fire burned low, throwing red glow across the cabin walls. Clara sat close, her hands open before the flames. Elias leaned against the doorframe, watching the snow harden into a crust of silver under the moon. The echo of riders still haunted the valley, but inside silence softened. At last he spoke, not loud, not fierce, but steady. They'll never see you as I do. Clara turned, her face half-shadowed, half-lit. And how do you see me? He hesitated, every word dragged through years of grief. Then, rough but clear, he answered, as worth standing for. Her breath caught. The fire popped. Between them, silence deepened, no longer empty but alive, carrying something unspoken, undeniable, waiting only for the courage to cross. The night bled into silence. Stars cut sharp above the frozen ridges. Snow glittered like shards of glass under the moon. Elias stood outside the cabin, breath clouding, listening. The mountains themselves seemed to hold their breath. He knew they would return. Not 6 this time, but dozens. Inside, Clara tightened the laces of borrowed boots. Her face was pale but set with resolve. She carried the rifle he had taught her to hold, the weight steady in her hands. We leave before first light, Elias said, fastening his worn coat. Once the sun breaks, they'll be on our trail. She met his eyes. Then let's give them nothing but shadows to follow. They moved into the timber, their figures swallowed by pine and snow. Each step cracked softly, each breath a plume of frost. The mountains were not quiet. Owls called, branches snapped, and the wind moved through the trees like whispers of the dead. Down through narrow canyons, over frozen streams, they pressed forward. But behind them, faint echoes of hoofbeats carried. The hunters had returned. Elias quickened their pace. They'll try to drive us into the open. Stay close. Clara's voice cut the night. I won't slow you down. By dawn, the chase closed in. Shadows moved against the white slopes. The riders fanned wide, rifles glinting in the early light. Elias shoved Clara into the shelter of a rock outcrop. Stay low. He stepped out, rifle braced, firing a crack that split the silence. A rider tumbled from his horse, snow erupting in crimson mist. The others scattered, shouting, firing wild. But Elias had left cover too long. A shot rang, echoing sharp, and he staggered back, blood streaking the snow. Clara's heart froze. She dragged him down, pressing cloth to his wound, eyes blazing. Don't you dare fall here, not now. The riders pressed closer, circling like wolves. Clara's hands shook, but she raised Elias's rifle, sighting down the barrel. She waited, breath steady, finger taut, then squeezed. One rider reeled, another horse bolted. The mountains answered with silence. The men, unnerved by resistance, pulled back. They cursed, regrouped, and at last withdrew into the timber, their tracks scattering into the valley. The snow fell heavier then, covering the trail, burying blood and hoofprints alike. Clara slumped against Elias, her chest heaving. He was pale, but alive, watching her through half-lidded eyes. You saved me, he rasped. She shook her head fiercely. We saved each other. By the time the sun crested the peaks, they had stumbled into the outskirts of town, battered, hollow-eyed, but breathing. Farmers looked up from their wagons, soldiers from their posts, startled by the sight of them together. Clara stood taller, her hand gripping Elias's arm, not as burden but as bond. He met her gaze. voice low. The vow I made, to shut my door, my heart. It broke the night you came knocking. Clara's eyes filled with quiet fire. Then don't close it again. Far above, in the Bitterroot Mountains, the cabin sat alone against the white. Its door creaked in the wind, swinging open to the empty silence. Once it had been a prison, holding a man chained to his ghosts. Now it was simply waiting, not for solitude, but for return. The snow swept across the threshold, erasing old tracks, leaving only the promise of new ones. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from.